Well, with that, good morning, everyone. Good morning to all of our online participants. Good morning to everyone here in Quebec Auditorium. Welcome to our students, their families. I see parents, siblings in the house. Welcome to our faculty. Welcome most particularly to our esteemed jurors. And I see some of our super jurors here. I also see some of our final jurors here. It's really wonderful to have members of the community, the architecture community, near and far, quite far, participating in this thesis final review process. It's an incredible honor, and you all have been so generous with your time. Our students and all of us are very thankful. Today is a special day. It's the announcement of the Super Jury Awards. Panelists are going to speak to the work, but then speak about some other things. But it's also a day to celebrate all of the thesis students and this culminating project of their architectural education. Many of these students now will go out and begin to practice in various corners of the field, and but we're here to celebrate this threshold, this milestone for them, and to get them started off on a great footing. I'd like to introduce our super jury panelists. Today in person with us, we have Carl Elefante, FAIA, Principal Emeritus of Quinn Evans Architects, past president of the American Institute of Architects, and author of the brand new book, Going for Zero, addressing how buildings and cities must resolve the looming climate emergency. We also have Duncan Stroik, principal of Duncan Stroik Architecture and professor of architecture at the University of Notre Dame. He's a founding editor of the Sacred Architecture Journal. Online, we have with us Gary Brewer, principal of Gary Brewer Architects, founder and board member of the ICAA, and our 2024 visiting critic in classical architecture. We have Robert Adam, RIBA, who is joining us from the United Kingdom. Thank you, Robert, who stayed up until 1 a.m. judging projects. He is principal of Robert Adam Architect, past honorary secretary of the RIBA, and visiting professor at the University of Strathclyde. I hope I said that right. We also have Rodolfo Alcuri, Dean of the School of Architecture at the University of Miami. And we also have Harry Penabad from the University of Miami joining us as well. We also had additional panelists who one of whom might join our review a little bit later. He's on a jury panel at the University of Maryland right now. This is the hardest working jurist around. 3 of these are alumni of our school. So many thanks to Michael Marshall, FAIA, NOMA, BS Architecture 19. I couldn't get him to tell me what year. He's the principal of Michael Marshall Architect. Siobhan Burke joined us from Los Angeles. She is a BArch and BS Engineering dual major, dual graduate from 1997 and principal of Lyric Design and Architecture. We had Daniel Jonas Roche join us, who is a more recent graduate, BS Architect. I think he said 2016. He is the news editor for the Architects newspaper. So he is somebody we would all like to have feature our work in the future. And we had Anki Barnes, a juror hero who joined us for both the finals and the super jury. Anki is a friend of the school, principal of Barnes Vance Architect, board member of the ICAA, and I just learned co-founder of the Whiskey Watercolor Club, which I'd love to know more about. So thank you so much to all of these professionals who have graced us with their time and thoughts. I want to commend all of our super jury commended students. We had 17 commended projects, which is really wonderful. They include from our fall graduating students, Nick Davis, Anne Jadu, Matthew Kazitzin, Mark Piak, and Patrick Whalen. Congratulations to you all. Several of them are online. From this spring's group of Thesis 2 students, we had Maria Amare, Hunter DeWizik, Sana Dukes, Jake Eaton, Mohammed Ghani, Grace Landon, Cole Hollier, Vincente Johnson, Melissa Casanzi, Victoria Riggle, Glenda Rojas, and Lauren Thompson. Congratulations. Everyone was struck by the beauty and the thoughtfulness of your projects. You can see their projects on the monitors throughout school. They're running continuously through the work. It's really an astounding collection of projects. Thank you all for your hard work, and congratulations to you. Now, for the moment everyone's been waiting for, we'd like to announce some awards. So the Paul A. Gettleman Award is awarded each year for a high GPA and selection for thesis super jury. This year's awardee is Glenda Rojas for her project, Rural Roots and Regeneration, Exploring Vernacular Social Housing in Rural Ecuador. And I can share Glenda's project. And I invite the jurists to offer some comments on Glenda's project. The microphone is just there in front of you. And I believe that the Zoom can see. Can this? Is there a way for us to see that too in one of these screens? I should be sharing. There we are. Can you? There it is. Okay.
So we had a tradition on the super jury. Everybody would be quiet and I would get uncomfortable about how quiet it was and I would say something. So I guess we're doing that again this morning.
I'm very uncomfortable.
But so let me just start by saying it's a real pleasure to be here this morning. And this was just really just reinforcing and encouraging to see this great work. There was a great breadth of work and just many interesting investigations into very, very many different things. And for me personally, I was particularly really happy to see how sort of mission-driven so many of the projects were. There was a real clear idea about how the world would be a better place if projects like this happened. And so Glenda's is a great example of something that, as I've gotten out in the world, gone to climate summits and things like that, I've really become aware of how isolated we are in places like North America, and that we're just really not hearing voices from other parts of the world, people that are living in different situations. There's about two out of every 5 people in the world live in substantially unmodern circumstances, something that we wouldn't recognize, like no mirror glass buildings to be seen, no steel mills to be seen. And so Glenda's project is really kind of speaking to that world. And what are the indigenous practices that are there? What are the indigenous cultural sensibilities that are there? How can we begin to look at creating a new generation of buildings that are meeting new types of needs, new functions, as villages turn into towns and turn into cities, and really sort of scaling up those indigenous sensibilities to really meet new needs, to scaling up those indigenous construction methodologies to really meet those new needs. So that's how I would describe the investigation that this project was doing. And I think it's an urgently important investigation. There's a real dynamic to this. How do you create new buildings from indigenous ways of doing things? Where can you see it stretched and it feels nice and comfortable? And where do you see it stretched and you're kind of going, the collar is a little too tight? And so there were all those dynamics in this project. I liked the fact that there was a real awareness about climate and really trying to deal with the conditions on the ground there. But anyhow, I've had enough.
Thank you, Carl. Yes, so I want to second Carl's comments but ask some kind of what I consider hard questions. So it's a bigger question. Glenda did a great project and we had a very fine discussion and debate about various things. But what it calls to me is the whole idea about people in one country doing a project in another country. And I believe in her case, she may be from Ecuador, but thinking about doing a different, a different region of the country. Well, I think in the US, it's normal for architects to practice all over the US. So first of all, that's a good issue for us. How do you work? I'm from DC. How do I practice in Florida or in California or in the upper Midwest? That's a great question, or Vermont. And in this case, fairly economically deprived part of Amazon. So how does one do a project in another place? But then even more so, how does one do a project in another place from another country? Why would we hire an architect from Europe or South America to do indigenous architecture in the US or something local to the US? That's really the question. Wouldn't you want to have Ecuadorian architects do a project in Ecuador? And why would an Ecuadorian architect come to Catholic U to learn how to do an Ecuadorian architecture? Do you see the question? No, nobody sees the question. I think it's a really interesting question. Presumably, if I'm in Ecuador or wherever I'm from, and I come to Washington, D.C., I want to learn how to do something that the people in D.C. know very well. Now, the people in D.C. might know how to do Ecuadorian architecture better than the architects in Ecuador. That's sad. No, it's possible. It's very possible. And I feel like I know some schools that do work in Cuba and Italy and China and stuff. And Americans get invited to go to those places to do, for instance, Americans have gotten invited to go back to China and do Chinese architecture. That's crazy. It may be as good for China. It may be that we'll do a better job than the Chinese architects, but the real goal would be to train the Chinese architects to embrace their tradition and so on. So that's my kind of bigger question about it all. And it's so fascinating. And I ask my students this all the time. The other part of it is, for Glenda or anyone doing a project in a culture that has limited resources, is look at what's there, learn from what's there. And, some of us like to use the V word a lot at Catholic U. The V, vernacular.
Oh.
Do you use that word a lot? Right, the vernacular, the local tradition. And again, the local tradition of building vernacular is without architects, right? It should be. But you say, well, but we're doing so badly, we need architects to learn the vernacular, to relearn the tradition, and then teach the people how to do it. That's fine. But really the goal of vernacular should be that the tradition is relearned and it's actually done by non-architects, and you build your own house or the builder builds it or whatever. So clearly, from the point of view of this project, to me, there's a concern, and I see this in Latin America, that there is not an attentiveness to their traditions. And so Americans or students trained in America can perhaps help them to recover that. But ultimately, the goal should be for them to do it themselves.
And I'm just wondering if any of our online panelists would like to offer additional comments. Gary, Carrie, Rodolfo.
This is Gary. I'll make a comment. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great.
We can't see you, but we hear you.
Great. So this is a very accomplished project, and I think because she was, from the country, she started with an understanding and probably learned more as studying it. What the question that it brought to my mind is balancing local traditions with modernization. And I don't mean modern as an architectural style, but how do you balance the two? And to Duncan's comments about architects from other regions practicing in their regions, it reminds me of a story from New York in the 1920s at the New York Botanical Gardens. Japanese dignitaries were coming to visit New York. And so the Americans wanted to show and build a Japanese garden. So they studied Japanese gardens, and they did this incredible garden that still stands. And when the Japanese dignitaries came, the Americans proudly toured the Japanese around each element of the garden to describe, how it was a Japanese garden and what the elements were, sort of boasting about their understanding about Japanese design. And the Japanese smiled and shook their heads. And at the very end, through a translator, the Japanese said to the Americans, "This is wonderful. We have nothing like this in Japan." So no matter how much you try to study, a traditional style, it's going to come through the lens of the time and the place and the culture. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because that helps to update designs. And so I just would like to leave the students with that kind of thought.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gary.
Okay,
I'd like
Um,
to add something to that. I think what this student did very well, and it's reflected in the project, is not really try to approach this project stylistically, but really studied the available materials, worked on the processes of construction, how this will be built using unskilled labor. It's more about designing a system and not try to make a cultural statement about indigenous architecture. Although this is implicit, there's a thesis about indigeneity, but I think this was that the student addressed Duncan's questions in a way very mindfully by focusing on the methods of construction, materials, processes, and systems. This is what I appreciate about the project.
okay, can I come in from
Yes, please,
the other
Robert.
side of the Atlantic? I'm not going to be very brief because everyone's covered most of the material. I'd like to echo and well, two things. One is Duncan's issue as well as Gary's. I mean, there's always a tension between indigenous tradition and modernity, and in fact, I think the illustrations of what is there at the moment show that very well. And in particular, I mean, I work in India, China, the Middle East, and I always have to work with local architects on a practical sense. But also, I have to say that they tell me things about a place that I would never have known, however hard I tried. What's very interesting and very, I think, remarkable about this project, I mean, I think in Ecuador, it's a complex situation with indigenous and other populations, is what's very impressive about this is the analysis of social practice. This is a very, very easy thing to overlook. There are all kinds of symbols and ideas that anyone coming from outside is going to miss. And I think in the end, this deals with what I think a really very important issue at present, which is, if you like, the tension between, if you like, let's call it modernity or changing ways of life and what is indigenous. And this covers a whole series of social, economic, and other issues. And I think that this has to be admired for really trying to go into a great deal of depth, not just in terms of materials and climate and so on, but also how they relate to a traditional practice. So I just like to thank Ana Rojas for an excellent project.
If I could just say one, maybe one or two sentences about it for me.
Yes, of course, please.
What the vernacular, what this project, but more broadly speaks to is a certain degree of humility. I mean, to arrive at a place and be able to observe and not necessarily have a preconceived notion of what the outcome will be. But more importantly, I think that while it's a regional response, perhaps what the vernacular reminds us of is that there are also universal principles, and it allows us to focus on fundamental principles. Should we lift our buildings in wet zones? Should we actually employ pitched roofs, even though, let's say, modernist theories might deny us that possibility, but maybe it's the one that makes the most sense in areas where it rains. How can we cross-ventilate these structures without necessarily mechanizing all of our buildings? So in a way, while they are regional responses, they remind us of timeless, universal lessons of the making of buildings and of places. So for that, I'm grateful. I can't speak in detail to the projects. I'm just sort of seeing it here for the first time, but thank you for sharing it.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations to Glenda. Our next award is the AIA Medal for Academic Excellence, which awards the highest GPA and selection for a thesis super jury. The award goes to Grace Hasladen for rekindling the sacred within the traditional horizon. And I can share her project. Actually, very good.
So same as us. This is.
Wait, come back. Where's the Zoom?
Yeah, that's the joke. They spend a lot of money. Do even more crazy stuff.
Okay. Here we have Grace's
Sure.
presentation. Or whoever might like to comment.
Sure.
Mhm.
Oh, this is right. So this is an interesting project for a person that some believe is an up and coming saint. He's the most decorated military chaplain in Korea. And so in his hometown, proposing to have a pilgrimage church and a very grand building, very, very grand. And I'm always shocked when students do grand buildings for their thesis. You should do something very, no, I'm kidding. Okay, it's your chance, right? It's your chance to do, something that you're really interested in and something really big. And this is a really big project. This is, we saw a number of projects. Some of the jurors said we shouldn't talk about budget. I'm an architect who loves talking about budget. This is a very expensive building. I also think that most of the great buildings that you love, cost a lot of money too. So I don't think that's a bad thing, but it's just like to acknowledge that. And I think what she has done with the big pilgrimage church, very sophisticated Gothic architecture. And I know most of you study Gothic architecture for about 4 years here or 3 years. So it's no surprise that you'd be so good at it. She'd be so good at it. It's a joke. It's hard to learn that language. It would be like learning Greek, in 3 years. And she's done an amazing job looking at, wonderful precedent. I said, Robert Adam didn't agree with me, but I see it as very British in a Cram, Goodhue kind of sense, who are, so I think some of our best architects in the US, but at any rate, may have something to do with the National Cathedral even, I don't know, but and then she proposed a little town that would grow up around it over, was this the one for 500 years?
Yeah.
Which is true, actually. A great pilgrimage churches and monasteries and seminaries often become villages in the US, as they did in Europe. At any rate, I thought it was a very sophisticated use of the Gothic. This is interesting, the site plan, and I counted 4 cloister gardens. Now, what's interesting is these cloisters, I'm very interested in monasteries. Yeah, this is good. In that the cloistered part is kind of the separate part for those who live there, the monks or the nuns. But this is actually a pilgrimage church. So the idea is that you would go on pilgrimage there and actually live there for the weekend or the day or whatever. So it's actually pilgrimage, it's actually monastery as hostel so that's a very interesting, innovative concept. And there's these kind of Tudor courtyards. I love the idea of an entry court in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, and then these small defined courtyards. But I think it's a very sophisticated, and I think down to the iconography. Look at that side elevation. That's like a simplified version of King's College in Cambridge. So really, my hat's off to her. There's some architects out in the U.S. that would love to have this young woman assist them doing things like this, albeit this is on a grander scale than we're attempting now, but it'll happen.
So would agree with all those comments. I just add that I talked about mission driven, and this one is incredibly deep in its sense of mission and how it translated that into a program of experience and then an architecture that would support that program of experience. And again, it's just a dimension of thinking about our architecture, I think is enormously important. And she did an incredibly nuanced job of that. I want to commend her for thinking about what will happen 500 years from now about a project. Probably something like 60 to 70% of the material that your buildings will be made out of will last 500 years. Are you thinking about their value for 500 years? And if you're not, you should be. So I really commend Grace on that. It's a very, very beautifully put together project, very beautifully thought through project, and I'm very glad to see it receiving this award. And hats off to doing so well in your academics as well.
And any of our online jurors want to add remarks?
As Duncan has referred to my my knowledge of British Gothic architecture, I won't say anything more about that. I just want to say I'd echo the issue of how incredibly ambitious this is, and I think the historical context, that the idea that pilgrimage itself leads to urban development has got a very long medieval history. In fact, a great deal of the pilgrimage churches were actually resulted in urban development. So I'm not going to repeat what other people have said, but I think the fact that this is seen in not only as an incredibly ambitious project, but something that has a future urban context is very, very, very valuable and very interesting. I mean, I'm always slightly skeptical about people who claim the future, because the only thing we know for certain about the future is we don't know what it is. But in fact, the business of architecture is actually in the end about the future. It can't be about anything else. And so the idea that this be investigated in terms of not only its remarkable size and incredible architectural ambition, but seen really in what's now a very small and scattered community, that this would actually be the catalyst for creating something much greater, adds another dimension to what is in design terms and actually presentation terms and analysis terms, really quite a remarkable project.
This is Gary. I'll make a few comments. The jury reviewed 17 projects, so there was a lot to see and absorb. And I say this as a Midwesterner. When I finally realized that this was in Kansas, it reminded me of the quote, "Toto, I've a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore." Which is fine, because I think that cathedral or church is an important building type, and one wouldn't necessarily say, unless it was a sort of country chapel, that it was vernacular in any sense. To Duncan's comment about building budgets, I think that it's actually a good thing initially to show a client something that might not be within their budget, because what it does is it allows an architect to show an idea of a building. And many times, from my experience, if you show something that's really fabulous and people love it, they will sometimes find ways to come up with the money to pay for it. But at the same time, I think an architect, from a budgetary concern, should think about design in terms of phasing. And so I think that this design shows phasing of building out the community over 500 years. But I think that there also might be an approach for a chapel, to figure out a way that there would be a master plan for the building of the church, where it wasn't necessarily built all at once, because many projects, do have individual buildings do have a master plan component. And so that would allow something like this to be built as needed over the course of its building life. But this was a very accomplished project, and I think that the school and the students should be very proud of what was produced.
Having seen the project for the first time, I mean, the breadth is impressive to say the least, and the commitment of the student to the work, it goes without saying. I was also, I really enjoyed seeing the slideshow, the variety of drawings, both, you know, analytical, the digital drawings, the rendered drawings at the end, the freehand sketches. I mean, this is clearly someone who thinks by way of drawing in so many mediums, which seems like an obvious thing, but actually isn't necessarily prevalent. And I think this should be commended. So, you know, I would reiterate much of what has been said. I guess I just had one thought, and I guess I'm still wrapping. I'm having a hard time wrapping around the scale of the gesture given the context. Even though I think that the premise and the basic structure, all that has been said about the possibility of pilgrimage leading to urbanism is valid. And I wondered whether this entire proposal could still have been executed at a much smaller scale. I remember being teaching at Yale and coming across, and I forget the name of the chapel at the moment, but it was along one of the main quadrangles. And it was an extraordinary, almost like a one-room space. I believe it probably wasn't even more than 40 feet across. And oftentimes it has its doors open to the main quadrangle. And in it is the entire universe of American Gothic, but at a scale that was at the scale of the kind of quadrangle. So my question is, could this have all been executed at a scale that, for me at least, seems more resonant with the context or the site that she chose? Having said that, it's still an extraordinary project.
Great. Are there any additional comments? I think that was everyone. So congratulations to Grace. So our next award is our Super Jury Commended Award. This project, the student is Sana Dukes, Cultivation of Place, a People-Centered, Climate-Resistant New Orleans. And make that a little bit larger. And I invite the jurors to weigh in.
One of the things that's fun about serving on a jury is literally what projects generate conversation and where do those conversations go. And this was a project that generated kind of a threefold conversation. The first part of it actually kind of goes to what Duncan's comment was a couple, you know, on Glenda's project about, you know, we're looking at, you know, cultural inspiration. We're looking at the kind of artistic expression of cultural, those cultural sensibilities, and how do we kind of emphatically, intentionally use that as inspiration. And this project seemed to do that in a couple of different ways. One was very kind of fine-grained decoration on kind of New Orleans style buildings, you know, traditional buildings from the place, New Orleans, and then taking inspiration for kind of decorative motifs from a place that has been influenced by the Asante culture, but those building types were not Asante building types. And then quite to the contrary, really looking at the New Orleans typologies and really trying to understand how to bring them forward and to make them part of a current day plan. The second part of the conversation really dealt with dealing with a neighborhood, a whole you know, place for 2,500, what was 2,500 homes, that is totally threatened by its environment. You know, this is a place that got flooded. Anytime that the flood control mechanisms fail, it'll get flooded again. You know, there was a very serious consideration after Katrina to abandon this neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's almost sort of, frankly, it is kind of unprotectable.
We wouldn't build a new city there
Right.
today.
Right. Yeah. You know, Ian McHarg would consider this to be a non-viable site, you know. So what was an urban design plan that had canals for kind of parkway areas and then also a kind of a savanna-like grid of parks, all of those had a flood control purpose to them. And I think that was maybe as sophisticated an idea as we saw. You know, it just really worked to bring those two things together. And then in the end, there was this question of, okay, now it comes together, and what are the types of spaces, and what are their character, and what are the character of the buildings, and so on. And all three of those conversations were interesting, rich conversations. There was disagreement, there was agreement, you know, and so I just kind of give this one a gold star for having really generated a lot of discussion among the jurors. And I've said enough.
Well, he said it all, but I just want to throw out two other things. It was great, Carl. Two things that really struck me was the urban plan, which is a small urban plan of at least the focus of maybe 6 blocks. Because I believe as an architect, we always were doing an art that's very civic, very public. Even a house has a publicness, can have a publicness to it. And I think that we're always looking for a chance to do something good for the neighborhood. And here, the idea of creating a park is fantastic, right? If we could convince the city or the developers or whatever, isn't that a good thing for the buildings on the park, but also for everybody? So I think we always want to think, I always want to think that way in a civic way. And the urban plan has that, and has a strong axis, has a strong kind of walking, kind of pedestrian boulevard and water features. And then these, canals that cross it, has some nice architecture. And so I like that. And I like it, as Carl said, she put under the park and under some of the kind of public spaces, she put, what would you call those? Water.
Cistern.
Huge water cisterns under the public spaces. Brilliant for a place that's going to get flooded. Where do we put that water? Some of it can go under the parks if we design it that way at great cost to help with the next time that we have a bad flood. So kind of a great combination there. The other thing that I thought was fascinating and was the idea that many of the people in this ward, in this, is it a ward, parish ward, were from Ghana. And so to look at the palaces of Asante palaces, not really what I would say vernacular, it is vernacular of Ghana, but the kind of high-end architecture in Ghana of the king. And I think that, to me, that's a great example of architecture. The king or the prince or the wealthy landowner, and then that trickles down to me and you, who we can't afford all that, but we want something like that on a smaller scale. So trying to take that idea, it seems like a very American idea too. In America, we can build an Asante village. Now, I don't think she pushed that architecturally, but the idea that in America, you could bring a little bit of Ghana here, and people might want to live there. And you say, well, I don't want to live there. Well, some people might not. The proof will be in the building. If it's done really well, some people will probably like it. And we have those places in Coral Gables and parts of America where it's a village from France or from China or whatever. And I think it's very American in the good sense.
Any of our online jurors like to add?
Yes, I'd like to comment about the research. I mean, it's so thorough. A lot of work, preparation, speculation before jumping into the project. This is what, for me, this exemplifies the ambitions of a good thesis project, in the sense that it surrounds the demonstration, so to speak, with a lot of research and knowledge. So this is a great example.
Okay, can I come in?
Yes, please.
Um, this this project deals with something very practically, which we're all having to deal with at the moment, is the increased likelihood of flooding. This is a global problem. And instead of it treating this as a kind of nuisance that you've got to get over, this is actually viewed positively. And I did really like the wading in the water principle. It's the idea that this flooding is not something a sort of terrible thing we just got to overcome. We can actually view this positively as a way of dealing with urban design, and also culturally, the idea that there's a kind of religious and cultural attitude to water and rivers. So I thought intensely practical thing, and actually it's something as an architect and urban designer I'm having to deal with all the time, is how do we deal positively with the fact that we're having to by a regulatory basis build in flood protection, but then to combine that with a cultural positivity, to then something that's very specific to New Orleans. And I do like the Ghanaian connection, although as I think has already been said, could do with a bit more development, but I think the principle of that is very good. So there's a whole series of, if you like, cultural and intellectual strands being drawn together into something which is very, very practical and very realistic, and a genuine problem that anyone involved in urban design is having to deal with at this particular moment.
This is Gary. I'll say something about this. I think Robert and everyone else have commented on the attributes of the design. I want to talk about this from a different direction, which is that architecture is storytelling. And this is telling the story of this area of New Orleans and the story of what the project should be. And it's storytelling because architects should be adept at storytelling, because clients, that's the way that you pull them in. You tell them a story. And the other side of the storytelling is how the mechanics of, as an architect, how you tell a story graphically. I think that the days of doing drawings and pinning them up on a wall and standing next to them and pointing at the drawings that nobody can actually see, those days are over in professional practice. I think that most architects today do PowerPoint presentation. And I think that what was great about this presentation is combination of drawing, computer drawings, SketchUp showing views, the photography that shows the places, and then the video that accompanied that was sort of attached to this presentation of the women in church was really sort of moving. Once I could figure out what it was connected to, which Robert Adam helped point out. But I think that, the way that this presentation was put together and the brevity of it, I believe it's only 16 pages. And some of the other projects had many, many, many pages, and it was very difficult to kind of go through. I think that as an architect, you want to give an executive summary. And then in closing, I'll just say Mark Twain once said, "I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write a short one." And so I would say for storytelling and presentation, what an architect is trying to do is to get across important points in a way that is an executive summary and is easy for somebody to understand and take away.
Maybe as one or two thoughts, I wanted to reiterate an earlier statement about the urbanism. For me, the strongest, the most compelling part of the project is the urban proposal and the place where public space and infrastructure are conceived in a single instance. And we know this to be true historically in so many cities, thinking about the Ramblas in Barcelona and others. where these two worlds don't have to be mutually exclusive, meaning the world of the infrastructure doesn't have to be the domain of the engineer, and the realm of and public space doesn't have to be solely the realm of the architect. It can be both, in fact. And I think it was said earlier, but I wanted to reiterate, I thought that that was a really successful aspect of the project. And I think it would be interesting to see how the urban types could continue to develop to be able to build out this neighborhood really in time. But congratulations to the student.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations to Sana. And now we have a special announcement. This iconoclastic jury panel chose 2 first prize winners. So we have a tie, which is exciting. So first I will say their names and then I'll share the projects one by one. So congratulations to Maria Amare for the Holy Monastery of Our Lady of Theotokos. And congratulations to Mohammed Ghani for addressing homelessness. No one is left without a home. And I will share those projects now. Oh. It's a very, very large file. Let me see if I can bring it up.
Anybody here of these students? Maria?
Maria is here.
Mohammed, are you here? No, okay. Well, great to have you, Maria. I wish all the students could be here so we could flog you. I mean, so we could.
Oh, Maria.
No. We're not allowed to say anything. No idea right now. You don't do that at Catholic U anyways, aren't you always just nice? We do Midwestern nice at Notre Dame. Which I
That's
couldn't stand 30
Mohammed.
years ago, but I've gotten used to it.
East Coast Edge.
You have an East Coast edge? Yeah, I would assume so. Yeah. Which is,
Okay.
which is okay.
Maybe,
The world,
maybe while this is,
actually, that's the problem. The real world is kind of not so nice.
it is,
Nice.
it downloaded? Is it back? Is it there?
Right? Right. That's the problem. If we train them in school to be nice, then they're not nice out there.
Guide me.
Next to the Al.
Yes, please.
I mean, I don't need
They said
their help.
it's already up. They said it's already up.
Where is it?
To the right, they were saying.
What is the name of the?
That
person?
one right there.
Mark.
There it is, right there. Open, just, oh no, just open.
Well, I'd just like to say that this was really interesting that the jury had a number of projects that we really liked. I mean, we liked all of them, all 16, but very strong people pushing for this one and pushing for that one. And then some guy who is named after the baseball team in Milwaukee. He advocated, I think he gets the credit for giving 2 awards for number 1. And that made people happy because some wanted this guy and some wanted this girl, and which they're both great projects. So that's part of the fun of this discussion. And there was a view of this that really impressed a lot of the jury, which is kind of the exterior view from afar. And I love the precedent. Did some serious precedent of Ethiopian architecture, and I think also of Orthodox architecture, which broadly speaking is overall all kinds of countries and cultures. And yet there's some commonalities, which is beautiful to emphasize the commonalities. The centralized plan, and if you get to do an Orthodox church, it's kind of de rigueur, although there were basilicas, there have been basilicas. But what a great opportunity. I'm always looking for a client to pay me to do a centralized plan building, whether it's a house or a church or whatever. But so really wonderful studies of all of this. And then this amazing site for a monastery in California.
In DC, Rock Creek Park.
Oh, my goodness, in Rock Creek.
Rock Creek.
Okay, it should be in California. No. In Rock Creek Park, and you get the sense of Rock Creek Park there and this amazing aqueduct bridge. And I mean, it's really macho building, like the whole substructure for it. and then this beautiful centralized dome, also cruciform, with then 3 courtyards on either side. And very powerful, sophisticated, geometric, symmetrical, which would be generally a desire for a church, but especially for an Orthodox church. It would be a desire. Can't always do it, but in this site you could. It's really a tempietto or a temple in the middle of the landscape. But to get there is crazy. To go across the, what's the great bridge in Rock Creek Park by Cray? Nobody knows. Okay.
Connecticut Avenue Bridge.
Connecticut Avenue. And what's the other one? Calvert Street Bridge. Yeah. One of those kind of things, right? Amazing bridge to get to this monastery. What a crazy idea in a wonderful way. So that's my initial thoughts. Thank you for a neat project.
This is Gary. Can I make a comment? Not on the project, but on giving 2 awards. And I do, before I go there, need to comment on Duncan's comment about my last name. American last names are not, they're based on what the family did for work. So Brewer is actually comes, I believe it's English, and it comes from, you know, the making of beer. I did look up Stroik, and Stroik is Polish, and what it says is it generally translates to reed in English, specifically referring to the vibrating piece of cane or metal found in some wind instruments. So that's interesting to note. But giving 2 awards, I think that not only are these 2 great projects, but they represent the 2 admirable directions of Catholic University's architecture program. There is classical or traditional, and there is also the more modern stylistic approach. And I think it's important for any university to include both of those directions, because they are in the kit of parts of what any architect can do in professional practice, and that what a building might look like is not a function of, gee, this is my signature style, but what I think it should be is more along the lines of what is appropriate for the place, the client, the building type, the budget. And I think that if you train architects that both traditional designs and modern designs are feasible, it allows them to select a look for a building that's more appropriate. So I think that is to be commended at Catholic University. You know, in closing, if these architects are going to kind of continue to practice in professional practice once they graduate, I think there's a percentage that 52% of American architects' billings are along the lines of renovation or restoration. And so that's another reason to sort of study traditional and modern. Restoration isn't just of traditional buildings, it's also of mid-century modern. And currently, the architectural community's attitude about preservation and adding to structures is that you do something of its time, you know, in a modern style today. But more and more communities and the architectural profession is leaning towards the idea of restoring in the way that architects, not only American architects in the 19th and early 20th century, added on to buildings and restored them in styles that were sympathetic to the original design. So I think that that's another important reason for Catholic to have, you know, a multitude of directions that a student can study when they're studying architecture.
Any additional comments regarding the project?
Yeah, so I'll chime in if there's no one else online that wants to get involved yet. So I want to go to an earlier comment that Duncan made about this sort of a big challenge about kind of going and looking at you know, cultural inspirations from other places and that whole dynamic of bringing them here and so on. And I think this project, which is, by the way, Maria, an absolutely beautiful project, beautifully presented. I mean, just things like there was a lot of comments about the use of the Causeway Bridge and its appropriateness in Rock Creek Park, you know, et cetera. There's a lot of gestures like that where you just found a really beautiful way to make architectural form that really speaks. But I want to use this project to just point out one of the other dynamics that is in a lot of these projects, and that is using very traditional architecture for kind of new purposes. And and actually Grace's project, like it actually wasn't all that much of a new purpose. It was actually kind of a traditional purpose. So this is a monastery.
Right.
And so there wasn't a lot of tension of trying to create a new use type, a new, you know, like, where's the loading dock? How do, you know,
Right.
that actually that comment was made
Yeah.
about your project,
Yeah.
you know, but if you have, you know, people that are part of the order, the answer is they have carts and they put the trash in it and they take it out to the end of the causeway. That's part of their
Yeah.
routine. But I do think that there were a number of these projects where there was difficulty feeling that there was an authentic solution to it, that the stretching of the traditional architectural motif to trying to meet new spatial needs, you know, was difficult, and it wasn't really working very well. I'll just say one comment to me, which is one of the things that I feel like could apply to several of these projects, and that is, did you think about accessibility? Did you think about the dignity of accessibility? Not just, yeah, there's an elevator over in the corner, but people of all sorts of different physical abilities and mental abilities live in this world and ought to be able to experience your architecture. So I just think that that's a topic that should be a bigger part of the discussion about using traditional architectural form for in current places. I won't even say new, in current places, for current purposes in our current culture, and really making it work fully.
I think what the student has done here is she's created a world, not just a building. And what was interesting in seeing the sequence of perspectives for me was that there was also a variety and a layering of architectural language. It wasn't a single hand, so to speak, which made me feel as though the place had been built incrementally in time. Maybe the gates, I can imagine somebody coming to the site and imagining that it was built incrementally. And so I really, the part of the project that I loved was the perspectival sequences, seeing the building from a distance where the kind of monumentality registers, and then making my way through that landscape, through those gates, and kind of experiencing the world that you've created. I think this would be a site that people would want to visit, and sort of exudes this quasi-spiritual quality because of its proximity to the landscape. So, you know, the larger topic of how to teach architecture today, and how to teach traditions. And I think this would be a fascinating discussion, maybe even a symposium to be had in person. I, for one, would definitely like to attend, but congratulations to the student. Just one minor thing, and it seems so petty to say this, but actually the perspective is my absolute favorite drawing. I would just say the ones that I think are the most beautiful, such as the one that's right now on the still, are the ones where you still can maintain all the verticals, where there isn't a distortion in the views. I don't know how easy it would be to do that, but I think your sequence of perspectives and your ability to think sequentially is very, very beautiful. I would just say all the verticals should be vertical. Thank you.
Congratulations, Maria. And our final project of the day. Mohammed Ghani. Oh, sorry. Great.
So I just want to bring up, again, a homeless, building for homelessness. And there were some really interesting debates about what an architect's response is to, to a program or to a need. In this case, I'm sorry, this is where we're really in California, I believe Los Angeles, and a very large project, homeless center project, and very expensive. And so we had some very good debates about, what's the role of an architect in dealing with taking care of or providing residences for homeless people with a lot of needs. And the student went through all of those needs, mental and physical and drugs and so on, and yet giving them an appropriate place. And a couple of the jurors felt that this was fantastic, and it looked a little bit like a high-end condo in Los Angeles, and that was a good thing. That what we should do is give homeless people dignified places to live, which seems hard to argue with. And others felt maybe that the problem of buildings for homelessness was a problem of cost and space, and this was kind of unreasonable. And so one group thought it was kind of visionary, the other group thought it was unrealistic. And those aren't necessarily conflicting, but I thought that was a really interesting debate, and I was on one side of the debate, but that doesn't matter. And that was kind of fun.
I'm glad you stated those terms about this, because I do think that that this is a really important question.
Yeah.
And your students, it's more important that you're exploring your interests in architecture and learning about yourself and learning about those interests than that you've resulted in something that now we can go out and build. And I think this project is a really good example of a kind of a totally appropriate student level solution that I think pretty much even the advocates for this would say, no, this project will never be built.
It'll never be built.
It's too expensive.
Right.
It's not using resources to do as much as can be done. And yet it raises these questions like, well, why shouldn't homeless people have the highest quality spaces to work in? And I would just point to anybody that's interested in this topic, look at the work of Brooks and Scarpa, 2023 gold medalists, I believe, who have created a couple of nonprofits to do exactly this. And there are a number of their projects that you would drive by on the street and you would say, oh, look at that beautiful luxury housing project that actually are housing for the formerly homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And then also Letty Madam Stacy and David Baker in San Francisco, who are doing much the same thing and really making this case. Why should you be able to drive past a shelter or housing for the formerly homeless and go, oh yeah, that's where the poor people with drug problems live?
Right.
So it's a really, really interesting question in our world. And I just want to make one comment about it personally, and that is there's a kind of a zoning level solution here. Is that what we're going to do is we're going to have a color on our map, and then we're going to identify sites across our city, and that color is going to be, purple with little polka dots on it, and that's where we're going to put the homeless people.
Yeah.
And I just really question that. I think that's our solution is as much of the problem as the homelessness problem. And again, this project brought this conversation forward. And thank you, Mohammed, for having this conversation be part of this jury and be part of this school.
Mhm.
I'll add to the conversation on this, which is I was a huge advocate for this project, which I think some of the other jury members were surprised knowing kind of what I'm mostly interested in. And even though this project is, I mean, clearly this project is in LA and the look of the building has a kind of LA look, but the planning of the project is traditional. I don't know if you could go to the front on elevation, but the planning of the, like, to me, that's a stripped down classical facade. And the planning of the project with streets and courtyards and interior public space, those are planning principles that one could identify as traditional planning principles. And so, I know this is going to sound really controversial to some of the other architects, but I think that the veneer of a building, you could easily take this plan and you could turn it into any exterior style that you wanted to. But the planning of this is so strong that it doesn't come down to just experimenting with architectural style. And Andres Dewani, one of his criticism of low-income housing is that architects today tend to be experimenting on the poor in a way, with new architectural ideas that are not sort of tested. And so I think that this project with the street views and the courtyard views, is a humane proposal. Finally, I think that, studies have shown that providing housing for homelessness isn't the solution. There are other solutions such as education and government funding and things like that that allow, for not the problem of homelessness that we see elsewhere. But this was, I thought, a really incredible project.
Carrie or Rodolfo, do you have any additional comments?
No, I think everything was said very eloquently already.
Okay, well, congratulations to Mohammed. I think now we'd like to open it up to some more general conversation. I think Mark has a few thoughts to share, and we'll do some Q&A.
So I want to thank the jurors, all the jurors, for the lively conversation that we had into the night the other day and for the conversation this morning. You have illuminated so many of the themes and the tensions between those themes that all of us in practice try to wrangle every day, and that the students are beginning to appreciate and wrangle themselves and wrangled beautifully in all of these projects. And I also want to congratulate all of the students who made it to this super jury, and in fact, all of our thesis students, because your work is amazing. It's truly amazing. It's really inspiring. You're tackling profound problems. You're beginning your career with an experience of not quite wrangling to your own satisfaction some really difficult issues, which you're going to continue to work on for the rest of your careers. It's inspiring to me as a practitioner, and it's inspiring to your peers who are just beginning their studies here at the school. So I thank you for that contribution, for bringing to light issues of place, time, of modernization, of tradition, and how we bring, and cross-pollination between cultures. What's good? What's less good? What's going to create dignified places that people want to take care of, that they want to live in for generations? I mean, this is what we're doing as architects, is we're building places for cultures to continue in for generations. When I walk my neighborhood in Brooklyn, and I see parents taking their kids to school, and I see people going to work and people in the grocery store, this is what it is. It's about us perpetrating a way of life, bringing it up to date, making it possible for more people, making the place welcoming for those of us who live there, but also for people who want to visit and who want to push the boundaries, bring their culture to a new place. I spoke to a woman yesterday who is burning with desire to bring her culture in the Middle East to America and to take American culture to the Middle East. What is that desire? What is that impulse that we all have, that the students all attempted to wrangle and address in these projects? Why is Glenda in America? Duncan's question, what did Glenda learn in America that's going to help her be a better architect in Ecuador? She imagines an international practice with a foot in Ecuador and a foot in America. She has a partner. She's already starting to do this. Why did she come to CUA? What did she learn? What is she taking back with her? We saw it described in the jurors' comments this morning, but I think this might be a good place to begin our discussion is, what do we have uniquely to offer to people who care about tradition, who care about place, who want to respond to modernity in a responsible way that's life-enhancing? How do we get that done? And I'd also like to underscore a comment that the jury made that the strength of this university, and I think it was Gary who brought it out and made sure that our conversation was contained in this thought that here we embrace a diversity points of view. I think if you go around the room and ask everybody what's architecture, what's an architect's most important responsibility to society, you're going to get as many answers as there are people in the room. And the ability to bring all of those ideas together in one place and to have the kind of conversation we're having right now is the beauty of this school. So everyone is welcome here. All of these ideas are welcome to be tested, interrogated, and you're also all welcome to change your minds. So you all came into the room today with a very clear understanding of what architecture is and where you're headed, but maybe this conversation changed things just a little bit. So let's talk about that. So the diversity that we offer in this place is a strength, but it can also be a weakness. And we know how diversity can create division. So how do we create the kind of conversations that are productive, that are not divisive in a learning environment? And how do these thesis projects do that?
I want to just set a little context in two ways. One is a kind of place-based, and the other is time-based. So the place-based, if the world is 5 people, one would live in a place like the United States of America or Western Europe, truly the sort of the modern world that we're all part of. Okay. 2 would live in China and India. China has basically already made all the same mistakes that we made, and has essentially become part of what's called the global north. India is running headlong to do that, repeat all our mistakes and become part of the global north, even though they say they are the leader of the global south. They're doing it by being very global northy.
Yeah.
Okay. The other 2 of those 5 people live in the global south. They live in places that have been touched by the modern world. I mean, there's skyscrapers in Nairobi or whatever, but basically much of the population of both Central and South America and Africa and lots of parts of Southeast Asia, et cetera, are living in essentially pre-modern circumstances. And they are in a process of what's sometimes called technology leapfrogging. They're not going to absolutely do exactly what we did, but they're going to do a kind of a 21st century variation. And, cell phones, not phone lines running down the street. Okay. So that's the sort of the place one. So literally, Mark talks about diversity. Our conversation is 100% between the people, that 1 in 5 people living in the modern world. There's hardly any conversation that we're having outside of it. And to the degree that we are, it's mostly with China. So are we even having the conversation with the full spectrum of opportunity that exists in our world today? And then I want to say the time one. 300 years ago, the modern world was even a gleam in anybody's eye. It just didn't even exist. The preconditions that brought about the modern world hadn't even really been established yet. You could make the argument that some of the intellectual things had been, but the sort of the technological revolution that made it so that we make buildings out of steel instead of clay, that we have multi-story buildings that have elevators and things like that, none of that existed. So in 6,000 years of creating structured habitation for people, we call buildings and cities, the modern era is a 300-year blink in the eye. Do we think that the only value in understanding how people are inhabiting places, how they relate to the environment, et cetera, do we think that the only valuable knowledge was created in the last 300 years? Is there something about that other 5,700 years of human habitation that might be of value? So when Mark talks about diversity, those are the two things that immediately come to mind to me, that we're trying to struggle with the idea of diversity, talking among ourselves in this modern world in places like the United States of America, and we think diversity is talking to somebody in Kansas.
That's nice. Yeah, that you said a lot. I like the idea that, you know, we value the last 300 years, or for most architects, I think the last 100 years, really, rather than the last 5,700 years or whatever. I think that's really heartening. And there's two views, right? The one view is we're so different today. We've got to have a new architecture. We've got to change everything. And we're being pushed to change things by transportation and technology and the economy. And there are things being pushing us to do things differently. And then the other view is, no, actually humans we're the same people we've been for thousands of years. And that we can learn from 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago. But ultimately, I think it should be a human-centered architecture, that architecture is about people, providing for people, and respecting what's there and what has been there architecturally. It speaks to other architecture. I noticed that a lot of the grad students in the group that we juried were very interested in biophilia, which I'm not an expert at. The guy next to me knows a little bit about it. He probably wrote one of the books on it, but and that's great because of the love of biology and the love of nature and so on. But and I would like to argue for this kind of human-centered architecture that we used to do pretty well. But anyway, I think that was a great comment, Carl.
And I would just ask if any of our online reviewers would like to respond to the Dean's prompt.
I had a few thoughts. Being in Miami, a very seemingly diverse community, although I'm speaking to you today from Guatemala City, and really it's been an honor. And I want to thank Mark and the rest of you, even though I know you can't see me. It's very, I was saying we're like Darth Vader speaking from the darkness. But regardless, I guess what it made me think when we think about the future of architecture, how to train students in architecture, questions of language of architecture. I think perhaps much of we start to kind of argue about in stylistic, which seems to me to be surface discussions, whereas perhaps what we need to ask ourselves as a profession or as a school, be that Catholic or Miami where I am, is that really what do we value? And some of the things that I've heard is that, for example, value the making of buildings and places that are meant to last. Then we may be spending longer on determining the kind of tectonics and materiality of a building alongside the production of a seductive rendering, for instance, because it's in that assembly that we can ensure that the building will withstand the test of time. Or for example, if we believe that cities should be more diverse and perhaps not address solely the needs of the car, that they're walkable, then we would be focusing on foundational principles of urban patterns that I think, to the point made earlier, would talk more about the kind of fundamentals, the kind of wisdom that comes from the ages. And I think that if perhaps we focus on these items, then the architectural expressions will emerge. And I think at one point, everyone in the audience will likely, I mean, at least this is my view, will choose a language so that one can be literate in that language. But perhaps the focusing on the foundational, timeless questions of what we value might allow us to stake the claim on the things that are most important.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to
I
talk
think
about,
that's well said. This is, oh, Gary, go ahead.
yeah. So I'd like to talk about diversity maybe from a different angle. So I'm sitting here looking at your screen where it says class of 2025. And so this graduating class, I know it's hard to believe for a 20-something, but someday you're going to be the age of the people on the jury. And you may find yourself, let's say in 35 years, you'll be, on a jury like this where it'll say class of 2060, if you can believe that. And, I think that roughly Duncan and Mark and I are the same age. When we were doing a final jury like this 35 years ago or so, we were sitting in a room, the jurors, drove or flew. It was all in person. There were drawings that were pinned up on the wall that we had hand drawn. And so, look at the changes in 35 years about how the education and practice of architecture has changed. We're on a Zoom call, including some of the parents. And, there's a juror in Guatemala City. Robert Adam is, in the UK. I'm in New York. You all are in DC. The presentations that we saw, they were done hand-drawn. They were done in the computer. They were done with SketchUp models. Some of the projects, like for example, Mark Piak with CJ Howard had an incredible video. So, the ways of making architecture and communicating architecture today, was something that like Duncan Stroik couldn't have even dreamed of when he was like 23 years old. And I wonder how in the future, when these students are in the place of the jury today, how much it will have changed. I mean, there's a whole kind of conference or seminar that one could arrange about how AI is going to change architecture. So I think that to one of the other jurors' comments is the fundamentals and the foundations of designing buildings and places and cities might sort of stay the same in the future, but the means of making those places hopefully will be improved and will address the issues of diversity that, Mark is pointing out.
This is what we're doing. I think this is our project, is to preserve, recover, perpetrate those timeless principles, that wisdom of the ages, the stories from the way back, those things that make us human, the places, because we see these qualities all around the world, in ancient places, in modern places. And if the more we can draw our attention to those things that are perennial and that are uniquely human and that uniquely make uplift our lives and bring peace to the world. These are the things that the principles that you can take anywhere. They're universal. And the march of time and the march of technological progress and what we're able to do with our hands and our eyes and our brains will continue to expand and amplify our capabilities. So the extravagant communication of information that we've just experienced through these gorgeous presentations, the review by jurors around the globe the other night, what we're doing right now, made possible by all this brilliant technology, is helping us more quickly, more vividly, more confidently reach conclusions about what's good and, how we're going to move forward and how we're going to make new buildings and new places. The world's going to continue to grow and expand. We'll abandon some places, but we're always pushing the frontier. And, I think that's why Glenda came here. She knows that her country is going to continue to grow. There are new frontiers. Glenda, there you are. Congratulations. You not only did a beautiful project, but you prompted a really rich conversation. And I hope that you will go back and listen to the tape because Duncan said he raised a very interesting question, which we're wrangling right now. And I postulated to the group just a few minutes ago, why did Glenda come to Catholic University? What did you hope to learn here that you're going to apply to this practice that I know you've already imagined, that you're already beginning to do? So I'm not going to put you on the spot. This is for us to speculate on.
I'm really glad that Gary mentioned the class of 25 on the Blackboard, because I wanted to comment about one thing about the class of 2025. Mark described this sort of this technological miracles that have allowed us to do some amazing things and have this conversation with people. I don't know. I think we had 8 or 9 time zones represented in the jury discussion the other day. So it's amazing. We live in miraculous times in that way. We complain because it took us 10 hours to get to Rome. Oh man, what a pain. It took us 10 hours.
Instead of 10 months, yeah.
Right, exactly. But you guys also lived through COVID. You had your college experience disrupted, and it was reduced to what these machines allowed us to connect with each other. That gives you a perspective on what was there and what was wonderful and what was gone and what was missing. And you have a unique perspective on that, because that happened at the time of your life when it happened, this incredibly exploratory time of your lives, et cetera. So I would just ask you, please connect to that and share what you learned from that, because I think that it's a kind of a microcosm of the future. We're struggling with how do we stay people and how do we just glory in all of this amazing, miraculous stuff that we have.
Totally.
You have a perspective on it that others need to hear.
Totally agree. And on that note, are any of you in this room interested in craft, in making things with your hands, or paying other people to make it with their hands? Only one or two or three? Okay. So what is really interesting that we're seeing, and it may be because your generation is like the best generation ever to come along. Yeah, laugh. Or because of COVID and so on. This, we realized the things we lost. And so, but there is a whole movement in the US to recover crafts, handcrafts. That's really what I love, to see when people build things. I like to see them build bricks. I'm okay with concrete and steel, but I like them to do things with bricks and cut stone and marble and plaster with their hands and all that. That's what I love. The other stuff can look just as good, but actually the making of it. Now, this is interesting. Remember that big building in Europe that burned down? The French kids were all excited to work on it. There's a whole movement among Frenchies, young Frenchies, to learn how to do stone and heavy timber. And they cut down, 10,000 trees that were made for that purpose to, rebuild the roof. And the modernists, the architects all wanted to rebuild it in steel and concrete so that it would only last 200 years. And so it's too bad we didn't do that. But at any rate, no, but there's this whole movement with French youth. Now, the other thing is lots and lots of people were involved in that building, the restoration of Notre Dame. And it's incredible. It was the highest level of craft in the world, I would argue, to rebuild that building within, 2 years. It was crazy. And it's all Macron's fault that it was 2 years. It's also the fact that he said it had to be done for the Olympics. They had to do it so fast, also precluded them from doing the steel and concrete roof, because they already knew what to do. They already had the drawings of the roof to rebuild it, whereas the steel and concrete roof with the titanium tower would have taken a year or two to rebuild, to design, even if it was on AI. Are you following this argument? Anyway, there's a whole French movement of craft, and they have learned how to do it with restoring this cathedral in France. They want to go and share that knowledge of craft with other countries. They should come here and train us to do stone cathedrals and wood roofs and, and other things too. What do you think? Does anybody buy that or totally against it?
They did
That's
it-
what we need to do.
They did it once before.
Yes.
I
yes.
mean, literally.
So this is very exciting. It's the craft movement. And I hear that your generation and your little sisters and brothers, they want to do this. They want to do craft. The school, the upper class people in Boston are sending their kids to vocational schools because Boston's a tech hub. Anybody from Boston? It's a tech hub. And they say that wonderful thing that Gary thinks is the greatest thing in the world, AI, is going to put their kids out of business. So learn something that can't be put out of business, which is working with your hands, whether it's being an electrician or being a carpenter or whatever. So there's a whole movement for this. This is good for architecture because you can have talented people that are knowledgeable building your buildings and working on your buildings. And you can do things that maybe we couldn't easily do, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. This is very exciting. So there's craft schools going in the public schools, private schools. I'm involved in one in the Midwest. It's very exciting. And that to me is one of the futures. It's not necessarily the only future, but I think it's the good future.
Well, I hope all those young Frenchies will pack their suitcases with wine and cheese so we don't have to pay tariffs and we can enjoy them. So the conversation the other night that was alluded to, I think Gary had said that Catholic with a small c means diverse, and we corrected and said, well, Catholic with a small c means universal. And as our program becomes more Catholic, more universal, I think it becomes more critical that we're able to distinguish what is good in the work that we produce. It's a much more complex thing to evaluate. These jurors evaluated 17 projects out of a potential pool of 40, 42, and they, in 3 hours, evaluated it and came to an understanding of what was really good. And I would say, how do you do that? Because these students are about to be graduates, practicing architects, hopefully, and they'll be confronted all the time with the question, well, is this good? Is this the right version? And I would say, how do you, as educators, practitioners, writers, how do you evaluate and discern what is good?
So real quick, find something that is great, that you think is great, but other people think is great, and do it really well. That's what I recommend. And I recommend to my students and my staff is you don't need to do everything, but define those things that are really good and invest and be the best you can be, like an athlete. Anybody like sports here? Not really. No, you don't watch sports, right? Think about a great athlete. I think architects are like athletes, and you've got to be really good. The great thing is we don't all have to be really tall or really strong or whatever, and you can be a really good architect without having those physical attributes. And we can be really good, but you invest in doing that thing which you love and do it really well, whether it's a house or whether it's a monastery or whether it's a place for homelessness or, whatever you're drawn to. But I mean, also the architecture, the language, the literate language, and it's hard to do. I just did a ballet a year ago, and I had to teach them how to do ballet. No, I hired great dancers, and I hired a great choreographer and a composer. I hired the best that I could find to do this thing. And what I was struck by is it's a lot like architecture. You learn there's a craft. You want to be really good at doing something in dance. And there's different kinds of dance, right? There's contemporary jazz, Balanchine, classical, all the stuff. But you can't be the best at all of them. You can be good at them. Baryshnikov was pretty good at almost anything he could do. But most of us, you focus. And that's what I want to encourage you to do is focus. Find something that you love, that other people love, though. Not just like I have this odd interest. No, you want to get paid to do your work and invest in that and be the best you can possibly be at that art form.
Well said. So two things that I would point to. One is that I think we've all always understood, no matter what your approach to architecture is, that there's really kind of two sides to architecture. There's the craft of architecture. There's literally being form givers that we do. There's an awful lot of making shiny objects. It can be very detached at times, but there's kind of us as form givers, that's part of it. But the other thing is that what are these things for? They're buildings. They're going to be occupied by people. They have human purpose. And I can tell you that when I went to architecture school back in the olden days, the human purpose side of architecture was almost not even talked about ever. And I said at my opening comments of this, one of the things that I was most impressed with is that you could really see the human mission that was thought about in every one of these projects. The most important place that you need to succeed as an architect is that the human purpose that you're serving is being served well. And I would even go so far as to say, I'll take an ugly building that serves human purpose well over a beautiful building that doesn't. Even though, frankly, buildings are reused for all sorts of different things, and sometimes a beautiful building will just find a way to be purposeful too. But at any rate, I'll stick with my comment, even though that I know that there's untruth in it as much as there's truth in it.
Could you just talk more about when we were kids, what was the rating of a building? Because it wasn't of the human purpose. What were we talking about?
We were talking about stylistic games.
Yes.
And I happened to be in architecture school right after Robert Venturi's Complexity and Contradiction was published. And it was actually a very rich conversation.
Yes.
Did the sort of modern dogma have all the answers to the problems of the human race?
Right.
And at least Robert Venturi said, I don't think so. Can we at least have a conversation about it? And it was a really interesting time to be in architecture school. And I look back, 55 years later and say, gosh, that really informed me questioning what, the kind of the dogma that we're following.
It's very healthy to question it.
Very, very important. So, really understand your human purpose and then bring your love of the craft to that. But then the second thing I want to say is that you're expressing yourself. You are exploring yourself in all the work that you're doing. So this is also about you having a very personal evolution mission that you're on, and you can't forget about that either. I think it was Charles Moore who talked about the architects program, I think was the term that he used. And he said, to the effect of, our problem is that we're all really liars. We never really talk about what's going on. We all sit around and we talk about all the important things about the owner's program or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, you walk in the room, you have your program.
Right.
Couldn't we at least have a conversation where we're bringing our program and the owner's program together, and we're actually sharing in this kind of richness of that exchange? And actually, I think that's happening more and more. So don't forget that. Bring your mission, bring your evolution, bring your interests, your loves and hates, whatever it is. Don't be ashamed about bringing that, and bring that to your job interview. Architecture is a mission-driven business. It's not just about, can you do door details? It's not just about, can you do, a hardware schedule? Bring your mission to your job interview. Show them your project. Show them the human purpose that your project was, your thesis project was fulfilling. Because the mission-driven people that are the leaders of architectural firms will go, there's somebody with a mission. I need somebody with a mission to work for me.
I have something to add to the conversation. So the question was, how do you determine what is good or not so good? And before I go there, I do have to say that I feel like I'm at the reunion of the Golden Girls, because we're all talking about, what it was like 35 years ago. But I would want to say that, the way that architects decide what is good is an inward looking conversation, like you get the most famous architects and and they tell everyone, they judge projects, and that's how juries work and awards work. And they tell the rest of the architectural community what is good and what is not good. And a lot of it is surface and stylistic. But in the practice of architecture and determining what is good or not good, it's not just the architect. I mean, you'll find practicing, and I think that the practicing architects, in the room and on the call understand this, is that architecture is the most collaborative of arts. And so, over the course of a design of a project, you'll be working with your staff, and you'll be working with the engineers, and you'll be working with your clients, and you'll be working with community review boards. And, it sounds very onerous, and it can be really frustrating, but it's a very interesting project because it's very inclusive, as opposed to the way that architects give awards to other projects. And so how do you determine if something is good? Well, you determine if it's good through the process of working with all the people that it takes to get a building designed and built. And that's what makes something good. And I would say that, just kind of in closing on that comment, is that it's super important as an architect, as you're practicing, to listen, because you're going to hear things through review of projects which you never thought about. And that's not just irritating, although it can be irritating. But if you have an open mind and you're listening to what people say, you'll find that good ideas come from everywhere. You don't have to be a Yale educated architect to, criticize a project. And so try to listen to what people say in the design of buildings. And at the end, what makes a good building is a building that a community and the people that use it love it.
Yeah, completely
you-
agree, Gary. Oh, go ahead, Carrie.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was trying to chime in with the right timing, but your question made me think of what a lesson that I learned from Vincent Scully right around the age that your students are today. I had the good fortune of being in his modern architecture course when he was teaching both at Yale and at UM or Miami. And he was teaching us about modern architecture, but somewhere along the midpoint of the course, he reminded us, or he asked us to know our Greeks. He told us, know your Greeks. And then he went on to basically state that we should be inspired and be literate in our profession. And it stayed with me because it made me think that ultimately, how do you judge? Well, I think you need to become literate in whatever it is that you are judging. And so to become literate is to be open to that full breadth of the history of architecture and get into the rink with the greatest of the great, let's say, the masters that have withstood the test of time, or perhaps those vernacular communities that we were talking about earlier that one experiences and is moved by. And so I would argue that before judgment comes literacy, perhaps. But then that isn't to be undermined by experience. And so today we're in an advancing digital age, which I think is so powerful and so promising. And I'm an optimist, for one. But I think there also needs to be a focus on experiential learning, going out and traveling. If you can travel far, great. But if you can just travel to the nearest neighborhoods, the greatest cities that you can get into, the greatest community, and if you can record them by way of your experiences, you will start to discern what is the best street you've ever walked down. And I don't think you need to be told what that is. You will know. So be literate and be filled with meaningful experiences.
Yeah, well said. I think to Elizabeth's question, how do we develop discernment? It is literacy. It's being experienced in the world. It's also what Duncan said. It's emulation. It's finding those places that are beautiful, that are good, and you recognize they're good because they make you feel good, and you can see that they're making other people feel good. And it's also what Robert Venturi was concerned about. He saw that the posturing of modern architecture hadn't achieved its goals. And he was saying, well, what's going on here? So critical thinking, so questioning. And when something isn't right, but it conforms to your ideologies, pausing and say, this isn't really working. People don't love this. It's, what's wrong about it? And it might take a long time to figure out what's wrong. I mean, it's taken us a long time to learn about some of the huge mistakes of the modern movement in this country. So it's not going to come in a flash. It's steady work. And I guess that's what it all boils down to. It's a lot of hard work and staying at it. Yeah. We're getting close to our questions from the audience, comments?
Last, to ask a question as a student before you become the other side of the divide.
I would just add that.
You're not a student.
Come to a mic or make an assertion.
Open mic.
Oh, open mic, yeah.
Yeah, I would add to your question, Elizabeth, how do you discern what is good? Good for what? First of all, you have to define your goals. What are we trying to accomplish? And I thought Carrie's comments on returning, keeping your, I don't need to talk to them. It's really the students I want to talk to. Keep your focus on the fundamentals. What is it that architecture can do? Because we can't do everything, but that we can do a lot. And look at those fundamentals and then define the goals. And then you can use all kinds of ways to say, did we achieve this? Does this do what we are trying to do? But until you know what you're trying to do, we're just wandering. Thank you.
Nice to say. More comments or questions? Correct all of us. Some of you guys correct us.
Can I talk from here?
Yeah.
That's okay?
Oh, they will feel like
You
yeah.
can't.
Yeah, for the,
Oh, boy, I gotta dance with this.
for the,
Okay.
that's internet audience.
How would Fred Astaire do this? I'm going to get into back to the idea of the word craft, which we talked about, and you asked who employs craft in architecture, and I think some of the great architects of their time incorporated craft in their work, but in a different way, an innovative way. Gaudí was a modernista. Gaudí was did plastic facades before anybody knew what those were. So the great architects and the great students of the future are innovators. And John Russell Pope knew that he was not going to be able to do stone buildings anymore. Frank Lloyd Wright saw what Mies was doing and said, well, I better learn how to do a skyscraper. So craft comes in different levels, and it's not mimicry. It should be employed innovatively to solve problems. And I think we have to remember that.
Students, come on, student comments. Don't let all the teachers talk. I'm not against teachers talking, believe me. We're gonna have a faculty meeting after this, actually. And you can talk all you want. But no, we do want to hear from the students, the grad students, especially. Can you guys talk up? Come on, say something. Say something really smart, though. Glenda, come on down. They want you to come on down. And say it in Espanol, please. Yeah, Catholic means peace.
No, not about that. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Things to high for me.
Pull it down. Pull it down.
Thank
Just
you.
crank it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I arrived a little bit late, but I heard most of your comments. For me, I know that one question is what I have learned coming here from my country. Well, I have learned a lot of things, especially how to approach modernity in a different way. For example, sustainability in a net zero way. What can I bring to my country? Well, luckily this school teaches a different way how to approach architecture. And what I have learned a lot for me, besides sustainability, modernity, is how to approach in a cultural, in a social way. I will say that overall, and thank you so much to all my professors. They were very helpful here. And this is not my last semester, so I know that I'm gonna be learning more the next semester. Thank you so much for your comments, and I agree with all of you, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenda. It should be noted before Gaudi could craft that beautiful building, he first built housing for his workers on the site, which is one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen. Ooh, excuse me. Anyhow, that is the end of our thesis panel discussion. We have lunch in the Miller space. Please join us for a continued conversation and food and hospitality. And thank you to all the students once again for all your hard work. Well done. Thank you, Carrie and Gary and Rodolfo.
Thank you. Enjoy lunch.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.